Greetings of the day to all my dear students. The thought for the day is energy is the currency of the universe. When you pay attention to something, you must buy that experience. So, when you allow your conscience to focus on something or something that annoys you, you feed it your energy and it reciprocates the experience of being annoyed. Be selective in your focus because your attention feeds the energy of it and keeps it alive, not just within you, but in the collective consciousness as well. My dear students, I hope that you all are in good health. This is Shreya Jadhav welcoming you all to my e-learning channel, and today we are going to learn English grade 11 chapter 2. We are not afraid to die if we all can be together. This is written by Gordon Cook and Alan East. So now let us know something about the author. Gordon Cook was born on December 3, 1978 in Toronto and is two-time Canadian Olympic sailor. He sails for the Canadian Yacht Club. He is the son of Stephen Cook and Linda Cook. Introduction for answer. Introduction for answer. Dear students, always remember that whenever you are appearing for any test or exams, start your answer with introduction. This creates a really good impact. Prose name. We are not afraid to die if we all die together. Author's name Gordon Cook and Alan East. Genre short story. Summary. This story is a story of patience and bravery on the part of the narrator, his family, and of the two crew members. So now let us start with the summary of Unit 2. We are not afraid to die if we can all be together. In July 1976, the narrator with his family set sail from Plymouth, England for Australia. His wife Mary, daughter Suzanne, and son Jonathan wanted to duplicate the round of the world voyage undertaken by Captain James Cook 200 years ago. Their boat, Wave Walker, was 23-meter, 30-ton boat tested to stand the roughest weather they could find. For 16 years, they had honed their seafaring skills. They planned their 3-year journey. The first leg, 500 kilometers, was set up to the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. From there, they had two crewmen, an American Larry Wiggle and Swiss Herb Sigler, to help them tackle the world's roughest sea, the Southern Indian Ocean. They faced strong winds on the second day from Cape Town, and in the next few weeks, the waves were about 15 meters high. On December 25th, Christmas Day, the weather was bad, but they celebrated the festival. On January 2, the waves were really huge. The first indication of the impending disaster came at about 6 a.m. On January 2, an ominous silence prevailed all around. The wind dropped and the sky turned dark. Then there was a growing roar of huge vertical wave, almost twice the height of the other waves, came towards the boat and hit it. There was a loud explosion of water gust in from all sides and wrecked the boat. The narrator's head smashed against the wheel and he was tossed against the boom of the boat. and then around the deck like the rag doll, cracking his left ribs and breaking his teeth. They somehow survived for 15 hours, and by the morning of 3rd January, they had managed to pump out the water. There was a tremendous leak below the waterline. The rib frames of the boat were managed down to the keel of the boat. There was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard hull except a few cupboards and partitions. The narrator and his wife Mary felt that their end was near and doubted if they all would survive. The children were hurt during the disaster, but they bore their pain. The son went on to tell his father that they didn't mind even dying if they were together. The narrator's boat, Wave Walker, had reached a remote part of the southern sea, which was not the route of other ships, so they didn't receive any response of their mayday calls. His accurate seafaring skills had brought the boat to safety and had saved everyone's life. The boat was in no position to reach Australia, so the narrator made some calculations and found two small islands 100 kilometers to the east, and they hoped they could reach one of them. The father was motivated to save his boat and all abroad. When they reached the Amsterdam, the son came to tell his father with gratitude that he was the best buddy and the best captain in the world. So, dear students, this is all about the summary of the chapter. Now, let us proceed towards the reading and explanation of the same. In July 1976, my wife Mary, son Jonathan 6, daughter Suzanne 7, and I set sail from Plymouth, England to duplicate the round-the-world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. For the longest time, Mary and I were 37-year-old businessmen had dreamt of sailing in the wake of a famous explorer, and for the past 16 years, we have spent all our leisure time honing our seafaring skills in British waters. Our boat, Wave Walker, a 23-meter 30-ton wooden-hulled beauty, had been professionally built, and we have spent months fitting it out and testing it in the roughest weather we could find. The first leg of our planned 3 years, 1,05,000 meters journey passed pleasantly as we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. There, before heading east, we took on 2 crewmen, American Larry Wiggle and Swiss Herb Segler, to help us tackle one of the world's roughest seas, the Southern Indian Ocean. So now, eventually what happened? That the beginning of the chapter says that from July 1976, it was the time where all 4 of them, the narrator, his wife, his son, and the daughter, all set to sail for Plymouth, England, to duplicate the world-round voyage that was made 200 years before. By whom? By Captain James Cook. And for the longest time, the author was 37-year-old businessman who had dreamt of sailing in the wake of to become a famous explorer. And from past 16 years, they have spent most of their time in honing their seafaring skills in the British water. Now they are talking about their boat. Their boat's name was Wave Walker, which was 23 meters, 30-ton wooden-hulled beauty. and had been professionally built. And we can say it was spent months fitting in and out, and they have tested in the roughest weather they could possibly ever get. And the first leg of the 3 years have passed very pleasantly. They have very pleasantly sailed down to the west coast of the Africa to Cape Town. When they reached over there, they took two crewmen with them. One was an American, one was a Swiss, and both of them would help them to tackle one of the world's roughest seas, that was the southern Indian Ocean. On our second day of Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales. For the next few weeks, they blew continuously. Gales did not worry me, but the size of the waves were alarming. Up to 15 meters, as high as our mainmast. December 25 found us 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. Despite atrocious weather, we had a wonderful holiday complete with Christmas tree. New Year's Day saw no improvement in the weather, but we reasoned that it had to change soon, and it did change for the worse. So it was their second day out of the Cape Town, and slowly and gradually they observed that strong gales were now hitting. That was not much more to worry, but the size of the waves were alarming. They were 15-meter high. That was up to their mainmast. On December 25, they were 3,500 kilometers east of the Cape Town. Their weather was not as wonderful and good, but they have spent their Christmas very well. The New Year's Day also didn't had any sort of improvement, and they hoped that it would change, but it changed for worst. At dawn on January 2, the waves were gigantic. We were sailing with only a small storm jib and were still making 8 knots. As the ship rose to the top of each wave, we could see the endless enormous seas rolling towards us, and the screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the ears. To slow the boat down, we dropped the storm jib and lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stern. Then we doubled lashes everything, went through our life raft drill, attached lifelines, donned oilskins and life jackets, and waited. The first indication of impending disaster came at about 6 p.m. with an ominous silence. The wind dropped and the sky immediately grew dark. Then came a growing roar, and an enormous cloud towered aft of the ship. With horror, I realized that it was not a cloud, but a wave like no other I have ever seen. It appeared perfectly vertical and almost twice the height of other waves, with a frightful breaking crest. So eventually what happened? The very next day after the New Year's Day, the next day, it was very bad on January 2nd. It was a time that there was the first indication which was impending about a disaster, that something bad is going to happen. Early morning, about 6 p.m., 6 a.m., sorry, there was an ominous silence. There was a pin drop silence everywhere, and it seemed that all of a sudden wind have stopped, the sky turned dark, and then there was a growing roar of a huge vertical wave. At first they thought that it was the sky, but then they realized that it was a wave that was vertical in size, and moreover to that it was double the length of it. The roar increased to a thunder as the stern moved up the face of the wave, and for a moment I thought we might rid over it. But then a tremendous explosion shook the deck. A torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. My head smashed into the wheel, and I was aware of flying overboard, the sinking below the waves. I accepted my approaching death, and as I was losing consciousness, I felt quite peaceful. Unexpectedly, my head popped out of the water. A few meters away, Wave Walker was near capsizing, her mast almost horizontal. Then the wave hurled her upright. My lifeline jerked taut. I grabbed the guard rails and sailed through the air into the wave walker's main boom. Subsequent waves tossed me around the deck like a rag doll. My left ribs cracked, my mouth filled with blood and broken teeth. Somehow I found the wheel, lined up the stern for the next wave, and hung on. Water, water everywhere. I could feel the ship had water below, but I dared not abandon the wheel to investigate. Suddenly, the front hatch was thrown up and Mary appeared. "We are sinking," she screamed. "The decks are smashed. We are full of water." "Take the wheel," I shouted as I scrambled for the hatch. So eventually, what happened? This whole big, huge wave just dashed very abruptly into the mast, the main board of the ship. Everything was destroyed. And then, after a certain time duration, they realized that they were sinking. The boat were having water inside them, and Mary was panicking a lot. She screamed, and at that time the author told that you are supposed to take up the wheel, and he would go down and help to fetch the water out. Larry and Herb were pumping like madmen. Broken timbers hung at crazy angles. The whole starboard side bulged inwards. Clothes, crockery, charts, tins, and toys sloshed about in deep water. I half swam, half crawled into children's cabin. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Yes," they answered from an upper bunk. "But my head hurts a bit," said Sue, pointing to a big bump above her eyes. I had no time to worry about bumped heads. After finding a hammer, screw, and canvas, I struggled back on deck. With the starboard side bashed open, we were taking water with each wave that broke over us. If I could make some repairs, we would surely sink. Somehow I managed to stretch canvas and secure waterproof hatch covers across the gaping holes. Some water continued to steam below, but most of it was now being deflected over the side. More problems arose when our hand pumps started to block up, with the debris floating around the cabins and electrical pump short circuited. The water level rose threateningly. Back on the deck, I found that our two spare hand pumps have been wrenched overboard, along with the forestay sail, the jib, the dinghies, and the main anchor. Then I remembered we had another electrical pump under the chart room floor. I connected it to an out pipe and was thankful to find that it worked. The night dragged on with an endless, bitterly cold routine of pumping, staring, and working the radio. We were getting no reply to our Mayday calls, which was not surprisingly in this remote corner of the world. Sue's head was swollen alarmingly. She had two enormous black eyes, and now she showed us a deep cut on her arm. When I asked why she hadn't made more of the injuries before this. She replied, I didn't want to worry you when you were trying to save all of us. So eventually, what happened that there was a loud explosion and all the water have come inside by all the sides. The narrator's head was also smashed against the wheel. The girl, Sue, was also hurt very badly. The two crewmen were also fetching water very abruptly so that they could save it somehow. And eventually, they came to knew that the condition of their boat was not that pretty well, but somehow they have managed to find some temporary solution. Sue's head was also swollen and she had two enormous black eyes, and after a certain time she showed that she also had got some injury in her arms. By morning on January 3, had the water level sufficiently under control for all of us to take 2 hours rest in rotation. But we still had a tremendous leak somewhere below the water line, and on checking, I found that nearly all boats' main ribs frames were smashed down to the keel. In fact, there was nothing holding up the whole section of the starboard hull except few cupboard partitions. We had survived for 15 hours since the wave hit, but Wave Walker couldn't hold together long enough for us to reach Australia. I heard our chart and calculated that were two small islands in few hundred kilometers to the east. One of them, El Amsterdam, was a French scientific base. Our only hope was to reach this pinprick in the vast ocean, but unless the wind and the seas adapt so we could hoist sail, our chances would be slim indeed. The great wave had put our auxiliary engine out of action. So eventually what happened that somehow they tried to manage to fix everything, but that was a temporary solution what they have done. They were supposed to find something which is permanent for them. The wave walker was broken in the major cases and they could not survive for a very long time duration. So the author again calculated that how they will be reaching at the one of the part of the islands which were on the eastern side, because it was not possible for them in this situation to go through Australia. So they were supposed to have a rest in one of the islands called El Amsterdam, which was a French scientific base. On January 4, after 36 hours of continuous pumping, we reached the last few centimeters of water. Now we had only to keep pace with the water still coming in. We could not set any sail on the mainmast. Pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull part. So we hoisted the storm jib and headed for where I thought the two islands were. Mary found some corned beef and cracked biscuits, and we ate our first meal in almost 2 days. But our respite was short lived. At 4 a.m., black clouds began building up behind us. Within an hour, the wind was back to 40 knots and the seas were getting higher. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the night, and by dawn on January 5, our situation was again desperate. When I went in to comfort the children, John asked, Daddy, are we going to die? I tried to assure him that we could make it. But Daddy, we went on, we aren't afraid of dying if we all can be together. You and Mummy, Sue and I. I could find no words with which to respond, but I left the children's cabin determined to fight the sea with everything I had. to protect the weakened starboard side. I decided to have to the undamaged port hull facing to the oncoming waves using an improvised sea anchors of heavy nylon rope of two 22-liter plastic barrels of paraffin. So now eventually the whole condition was that somehow they have survived for 15 hours. By the morning on 3rd June, they have managed to pump out the water. There was a tremendous leak below the water lines. The rib frames of the boats were damaged down to the keel of the boat. There was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard hull except a few cupboard partitions. The narrator and his wife Mary felt that their end was near and doubted if they could ever survive. The children were hurt during the disaster, but both of them bore the pain. Moreover to that, when the author went near to the children to console them, at that time duration, the children were also so much determined that they told that they are not afraid to die. They were afraid, but Jonathan said very bravely that they are not afraid to die if the whole family is together, and they would survive it at any cost. And for them, it was the most comforting thing. Somehow, they decided that they would manage to reach to one of the islands so that they could survive for a longer time duration. So today we are keeping it till here. In the next video lecture we shall continue with the chapter. I hope that every one of you have understood it. Thank you for watching and have a nice day everyone.